Boldwood presents How Not to Murder Your Ex, written by Katie Marsh, and read by Helen Keeley and David Thorpe. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Clio. On the many occasions Clio had imagined murdering her husband, it had never been anything like this. Her mind's eye had always turned away from what came next, avoiding the gore that would accompany the click of a trigger or the scream that might follow his flailing body after it was pushed from a cliff. She had never been serious anyway. Everyone knew that. It was just Clio saying her piece, moaning about Gary the way she always did. People thought it was funny. Last week, her darts team had even stuck his picture over the bullseye for their Friday night match. Clio's ensuing scores had led to the Raging Bullseye's first victory over the Dart Vaders for well over a year. It was amazing what a little motivation could do. But Clio hadn't seriously wanted to kill him. She had simply craved justice. Her house back, the company they had founded together to be half hers again, every penny he had taken repaid in full. But not this. Not even Gary deserved this ending. She forced herself to look down at him, so still in the wind that raged around the cliff-top static caravan that Clio had been forced to call home. As her PVC windows rattled, there he lay, his face turned to one side, his arm outstretched across her bottom step. In the dim glow of the security light above her flimsy front door, she could see the salt and pepper hair, the thick neck emerging from his checked shirt, the broad shoulders beneath the leather jacket he misguidedly believed made him look like a Top Gun recruit. His blood pooled thickly around him, a macabre halo, staining the brown step red. Clio knew what she had to do. When she had been a jobbing actress in her early 20s, she had played a runner discovering a body in an episode of Casualty, and she repeated the motions she had gone through on camera, forcing her unwilling limbs to move. She knelt, ignoring the loud clicking of her knee, stretching out her freezing fingers, pushing his gold chain aside to place them on his neck. Hope rose, despite all the evidence in front of her. Gary? She found the spot where his pulse should be. She felt nothing. No rhythm. No life. He was gone. Unable to believe it, she pushed harder, her wrist connecting with his chin, forcing it sideways, his face angling away from hers. She gasped as she saw that the back of his skull was caked in blood, the bones smashed and gaping, splinters of white visible against the wood. She took one more look, checking, praying, just in case this was another anxiety dream, one of the ones she woke from at just kill me o'clock, swearing, terrified and hotter than the earth's core. But the chill of his skin told her that it was not a dream. It was 5:30 a.m. on her 45th birthday, and the husband she had hated was lying dead on her doorstep. Even worse, this was no accident. Someone had killed him. Someone had murdered him and brought him here. Clio's stomach was churning now, shock starting to set in. She backed away from the body, leaning against the caravan, her mind whirling. When she had tottered back here, she had never expected to find this. For a moment she wondered if perhaps she could have killed him. Maybe Amber's lethal margaritas had tipped her over the edge. Cocktails mixed by someone doing the Macarena were always going to be a risk. Clio licked her salty lips and tried to remember. She knew she had left the caravan during Jeanie's screeching rendition of Wuthering Heights, driven as much by an urgent need for air as by her friend's terminal inability to carry a tune. She had aimed for the beach, wanting to feel the sea spray on her burning face, hoping to reach the waves before she went up in flames. But then her mind went blank, as it had so often of late, leaving her with a black hole where a memory should be. The only thing Clio knew for sure was that she must have reached her destination, as she had woken up half an hour ago face down in a sand dune with an empty carton of chips at her side. It was a miracle, really. Despite the gale, the darkness and a new high in blood alcohol levels, She had managed to make her way along the narrow pathway that ran along the edge of the cliff, somehow navigating Death's Drop, which revelled in the dubious honour of being the #1 seaside suicide spot in the south of England. To have survived all that, only to find herself here, was beyond belief. Here, with her dead husband's body at her feet. Clio had thought that slipping a disc while doing up her bra would go down in history as her worst birthday ever, but it appeared that life always had new treats in store. She shivered, dimly aware that Little Miss Trouble pyjamas were not the ideal attire for the discovery of a dead body on a stormy February morning. Inside her caravan, her friends were wearing them too. It was one of their birthday traditions, like karaoke and the neon cheese puffs from the corner shop that made their fingertips glow in the dark. Clio wanted to time travel back, to stay in her caravan, to be just the birthday girl listening to an unspeakable performance of a Kate Bush classic. Rebuilding her life one terrible temp job at a time. Now, she was a potential killer standing over the corpse of a man who had taken everything from her. It would take the police about 10 seconds to put her in handcuffs and lock her away. Could she have done it? Despite her brain fog, surely Clio would remember if she had. She checked her hands, but found no marks, no bruises, no blood. She looked around, but couldn't see a weapon. But she wanted to be sure, to have her story ready for the inevitable police interview in some hellish room with the kind of lighting that would make her look like she belonged in a nursing home. She put her head in her hands, listening to the crash of the waves far below her, and searched her mind, hoping for a clue, a moment, a flicker of something that would absolve her. Her mind was as empty as her bank account. She might as well get a T-shirt saying prime suspect. To the police, it would be such a simple story. An embittered wife discovers the body of her husband and says she can't remember where she was when he was killed. They would throw away the key. Clio could almost hear the clang of prison gates. She fought to breathe, but the nausea was rising. She stood up and retched, sharing the majority of last night's margaritas with the tub of early daffodils that Jeanie had brought round to brighten things up. Even when she had nothing left inside her, Clio stayed bent over, hands grasping her knees. Something strange was happening. In all those nights spent hating him and slating him, Clio had never imagined how she might actually feel if Gary died. How her eyes might fill with tears, how her mind would scroll through the good times, pushing the bad aside. For a second, she trembled, about to cry. But then she heard a crunch that could have been a footstep on the gravel path that ran through the centre of the caravan park. Clio stared into the darkness, hairs prickling at the back of her neck. She couldn't see anyone, but as she didn't have her glasses on, this didn't mean much. She had taken the wrong bottle in the shower yesterday and accidentally exfoliated her hair. Her pulse spiraled. She had to do something before someone saw the body. Even though she was at the far end of the caravan site, hidden away behind the bin store, someone could come along at any minute. You never knew with this lot. Last week, the woman in number 9 had started rooting through the recycling at 6 a.m., apparently searching for her passport. So Clio couldn't just stand here. She had to do something fast before someone found her with the body and called the police. She would never get out of prison. She would die in there, toothless and wailing and alone. "My mum the murderer," her teenage daughter Nina would say, while selling her body on the streets to fund her spiralling drug habit. "I never had a chance." Of course, Clio knew to find her phone and dial 999. But her mind alighted on another option, one that would give her the time to work out what she had been doing for the past few hours. Time to prove, to herself and to the world, that she hadn't murdered Gary Good. Because that was the problem. Gary was dead on her doorstep. Given that she had been MIA when the body appeared, and given everything that had happened between them, who on earth was going to believe that Clio hadn't put him there? The rain chose this moment to begin pouring down. Perfect. Clio stood up. "Happy bloody birthday to me, eh, Gary?" She swayed for a second, blood rushing to her head. She had a plan, but even at her best she would struggle to carry it out. Reluctant though she was to drag her friends into this, she needed backup. She needed companions at the top of their game. She needed James Bond, Luther, and a whole pack of Avengers too. Instead, she had 2 hammered 40-something women snoring on her living room floor. She had Amber and Jeanie. They would have to do. Stepping over her dead husband on the doorstep, Clio went inside to wake her friends.
Chapter 2. Gary. 8:30 a.m. Death minus 19 hours. On the day that he was going to die, Gary Good woke up feeling even more pleased with himself than usual. He waited a moment before opening his eyes, appreciating the kiss of silk sheets against his skin and the scent of lilies from the majestic bronze vase in the centre of the stone fireplace to his left. He had come such a long way. He had bounced back, as he always did, and now he had landed in a 4-poster bed in a country hotel so luxurious that it was about to star in its own fly-on-the-wall documentary. He had always known that the world was his for the taking. What more proof did he need? He stretched, wishing he could brag more openly about where he found himself right now. But he had to keep it a secret. So instead, he stared in satisfaction at the thick, honey-coloured hair of the woman lying beside him. Sherry was the stuff of fantasies, all 5'9" of her, all curves, long legs and tan, and he had known at their first meeting 6 months ago that he had to have her. Never mind that her husband, Marshall Fernandez, was by far his most affluent client. Never mind that Gary had a living girlfriend, Denise, nor that he was still married to Clio, a.k.a. his biggest ever mistake, because she wouldn't agree to the terms of their perfectly reasonable divorce settlement. He was Gary Good. He would have. As ever, he was right. One of the many plus sides of having wealthy clients was the amount of time they spent quaffing champagne in first class. Soon, Marshall was off overseas on business, leaving Gary to drop in on Sherry with some updated designs for the rebuild he was project managing at their home. Within an hour, he was taking full advantage of the businessman's absence to bed his wife on top of their 10 grand kitchen table. Naturally, Sherry had come back for more. They all did. And Gary was happy to indulge them. Now, he ran an exploratory finger down her cheek and checked the ornate clock on the wall, embossed with trails of golden ivy and cherubs. 30 minutes until he had to leave for his first appointment of the day. Plenty of time. It would be a shame to waste this opportunity. Criminal, even. Sherry's eyes remained closed, so he tried again, his hand tracing the curve of her hip until it reached her thigh. He leant down and kissed it. That got her attention. "Morning, you." That sleepy smile. Wide lips, pink tongue peeping through dazzling white teeth. "Morning, Sherry." He pronounced her name the French way. He liked showing her his cosmopolitan side. She gazed at him, wide green eyes soft. Even her yawns were sexy as hell. Gary's hand was still stroking her silky thigh. All those gold-topped lotions in her Chanel wash bag clearly did the trick. Clio had never taken that much trouble, no matter how many times he had thoughtfully let her know she was letting herself slide. As Cherie arched towards him, he wondered idly how much her beauty regime set her back. She could afford it, mind. A leading sportswear designer, married to her childhood sweetheart, who just happened to have built a successful sportswear label, Prince, from scratch. Their mansion was worth 10 million, and then there were the coach houses, cottages and stables scattered around the estate as well. When he had landed his first meeting with Marshall, Gary had known that getting the job could be his passport to the kind of clientele he wanted. At last, he could be who he was born to be. Design guru to the rich, until one day he would become one of their number. Clio still insisted that she had won the contract, that it was her ideas that had swung it, but then she had always... In truth, Gary had been planning this for years. Sitting there in his tiny teenage bedroom, staring at that awful navy and white charity shop duvet, he had always known that he would hit the heights. He had understood that the mouldy semi his parents so happily called home was merely a launch pad for the man he would become. Something to keep secret, something to escape. It had taken him a while to find his way, to be sure, but that was his parents' fault. They were always so bloody happy, content with their life of hard graft and a fish and chip tea on Fridays. They liked blending in, being normal, doing the kinds of jobs absolutely no one noticed. His dad had swept roads. His mum had cut hair in a salon where nobody tipped. When they had died, within 6 months of each other, Gary hadn't even cried. He had nothing in common with them after all. They were his past. Women like Sherry were his future. Babes? He was back in the present. Silk sheets and sunlight, and a woman who was currently starring in her own swimwear commercial. Yes? His hand was against her now, fingers moving in a steady rhythm. He was doing his finest work here, if he did say so himself. Last night, she had proved herself more than capable of giving the same treatment in return, and had shared some juicy gossip too. Her indiscretion had proved very useful over the past few months. She had told him of dissatisfied friends seeking new designers and perspectives, enabling Gary to undercut his rivals and swoop in with his ideas. Lost leaders, sure, but worth it in the long run, whatever Clio said. Gary. Sherry's voice was tiny, her back arched. She was close, he could tell. Yes? His middle finger was starting to ache, but he was man enough to handle it. There should be gym machines for this, little weights to build up stamina. He might look into that. His next empire. What would he call it, though? Magic touch? Yes, something along those lines. Even now, in the midst of pleasuring a beautiful woman, he just couldn't switch off his entrepreneurial flair. Gary. Yes? He wished you would stop talking. The clock was ticking. He was all for equality, but a man needed his turn too. She kissed him. I think we should get an aquarium built in, behind the hob, beneath the Sicilian tiles. I'd love to see the little fish swimming around. Gary sighed inwardly. All that effort, and she just wanted to talk shop. He removed his finger and circled it in the air, trying to get rid of the pins and needles. That's a great idea. It wasn't. Fish next to a hob? They would die the first time anyone attempted a stir-fry. But maybe he could put them somewhere else. He struggled to remember what was in the current plans. He had 5 projects on the go at the moment, all rich clients with endless wish lists. One was even importing a marble countertop from Asia where it had been blessed by the Dalai Lama or some such shit. Gary checked the clock again. He was running out of time, and he really couldn't miss this meeting. Another day, another new millionaire client. This time, Marshall's brother Johnny, looking for a sweeping extension and extensive internal redesign on his new property. Initial discussions had proved positive, and Gary had every reason to believe that he was going to get this gig. He needed it. Without Johnny's deposit, the turnaround plan he had put together last week would collapse, but Gary knew he could do it. His company, Looking Good, was going places. Take that, Clio. His companion sighed, twirling a strand of her hair around a glossy pink nail that he had rather been hoping would be digging into his back by now. Still, needs must. Business first, pleasure second. He had an empire to build. You like it? I knew you would. Her husky voice belonged on a sex line. Gary should know, from the years he had spent in the wilderness with Clio and her begrudging once-a-week regime. It was hardly his fault that he had looked elsewhere. I love it. He would work something out. I'll add it to the plans when I get to the office. He gave her one last look, but she was staring at the ceiling, lost in contemplation of little fish swimming nowhere. Oh well, no accounting for taste. He had learnt that long ago. Gary worked out that he wasn't going to get what he wanted, so he pushed himself up, ready to swing his legs out of bed. A shower and some of the hotel's excellent Turkish coffee would do the trick. Almost the perfect start to the day. But then there they were. The hands pulling him down again, wanting him, needing him. He could fit in a quickie. He was flexible. He could duck and dive. Give him a problem and he would fix it. Give him a challenge. Nothing kept Gary Good down for long. He kissed her deeply. Pulling away, he saw that smile. Come to me, and yes, and now, all rolled into one. Fingertips against his skin, hips opening for him as he lowered himself. He nuzzled her neck in a semblance of foreplay, pleasure prickling through him as he heard her gasp. Gary was so busy thinking of his own pleasure that he didn't hear the rustle of curtains behind him as a phone was pointed in his direction, the camera set to record. A minute later, he didn't see the figure quietly disappearing behind the heavy silk before climbing out and descending a drainpipe to the rose beds below. Gary Good was too busy ruling his world to notice anything. He had a beautiful woman moaning his name. He had a thriving business. He had come back from the kind of financial setback that would make other men throw in the towel for good. And so he carried on thrusting his way to glory, unaware of the person creeping quietly towards a waiting car, scrolling through their camera roll, smiling. Gary Good was going to die today, but he was too busy starring in his own story to be able to see the writing on the wall.
Chapter 3. Jeanie. Jeanie. Jeanie turned over. Just a few more hours of shut-eye, or days. That was all she needed to become human again. Jeanie! The voice was low and rushed, nothing like the piercing cries of her twins. They must be okay for once, meaning she could just turn over and go back to sleep. Jeanie, I need you! Yes, what is it? How can I help? What can I do? Jeanie sprang straight up to a sitting position, wondering why she was cuddling a sparkly karaoke mic. She had dim memories of belting out Reach, of doing her Vanilla Ice routine, of eating microwave chips and cackling over teenage hairdos in an ancient school yearbook. And then there had been tequila? Jeanie groaned. No wonder she felt as if she was made of doom. Once she had drunk her friends under the table, but now she was the kind of woman who slept underneath said table while the party raged above her. More sleep. She lay down again. Jeanie! A hand was jostling her now. She opened her eyes, taking in the expression on Clio's face. Instantly, she took her friend's hand, ignoring the nausea churning in her gut, the fact that her head was screaming for mercy. What's wrong? It's Gary. She had not when Gary got together with Denise, the nubile journalist who had been sent to interview them both for the local paper. Not when Clio had realised that Gary had remortgaged their house without telling her. Not even when Gary had got the board to fire her from Looking Good, the company Clio's money had enabled them to set up together. Jeanie pressed Clio's cold fingers in hers. Her friend was dripping wet and shivering. Why are you so cold? Clio shook her head, her blue eyes glistening with tears. Oh, lovely. What is it? Silence. This was a bad sign. Clio could always say anything. She specialised in speaking her truth no matter how unwilling the world was to hear it. Jeanie tucked a strand of Clio's scarlet hair behind her ear. The blue tips were black with rain. Okay, she was waking up now. The twins had got her used to going from sleep to hysteria in 60 seconds flat. How about you show me what he's done then? Clio tailed off. Jeanie heaved herself up to standing, grasping Clio's shoulder as the room swayed. God, how much did we drink last night? Too much. True. Jeanie pressed her hands to her temples. And it's outside? Whatever Gary's done? Yes, but... Jeanie hesitated. It's not down on the beach, is it? Because the wind sounds mad and I'm not sure I'll make it down. Clio shook her head. No, it's on the doorstep. I mean, he's on the... Okay, I'll have a look. Jeanie staggered to the door. Clio was trying to pull her back, her chunky gold rings digging into Jeanie's fingers. No, it'll be too much for you. I need to... It's fine. Jeanie was sure she could handle whatever lay ahead. Clio did have a tendency to be dramatic, a legacy of her years playing bit parts in TV soaps and leads in pub theatre pantos. But... Just show me, Clio. Jeanie's stomach was starting to roil. She saw the empty bottles lying in the sink and wanted to hurl. Judging by the state of her spine, she had done a lot of dancing last night, and her neck was so sore she was struggling to look down. She stopped. Where's Amber? Dunno, Clio shrugged. Maybe she left? I doubt it. Jeanie put her hand on the doorknob. She sang Wired for Sound after you went outside. She only does that when she's really wasted. Maybe she's gone for a walk. She opened the door, only for the wind to push her back inside. She tried again, making it onto the top step. All she could see was darkness. What am I looking at? The rain was lashing down so hard she could barely see the end of her own nose. Clio stood next to her, pointing downwards. There. Look. What? Where? Jeanie followed her finger. Her sore neck meant that she had to bend at the waist in order to see what lay on the bottom step. She rapidly wished she hadn't. Oh my God! Now she really was going to be sick. That's... Yes. Clio jumped off the steps and started pacing as Jeanie mentally apologised to the daffodils and hurled. Clio seemed oblivious to the rain pouring down around her. Jeanie wiped her mouth. It's Gary. Yes. Jeanie shuddered. And he's... She couldn't look again. Dead. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. But who? Jeanie tried to stand up straight, but her head was swimming. Gary was so still, so covered in blood. How? Who? Who did it? I don't know, maybe it was me. Clio's laugh was high-pitched, hysterical. I have no idea. I can't remember a thing. Shh! Don't say that. Jeanie slid down against the step, her back to his body, trying to get some semblance of control. Someone might hear you. But it could have been me, Jeanie. I'm serious. She could hear the panic in Clio's voice and wanted to calm her. She must ignore her neck, ignore her hangover. She must help. Jeanie levered her way to a vertical position and put her hand on Clio's shoulder. You didn't do this, Clio. How do you know that? I don't even know that. Panic gleamed in Clio's eyes. I can't remember where I was, Jeanie. And he's right here, where I live, so maybe... Jeanie hugged her. It was all she could think of. To be honest, she needed the support too. Arms around her, human contact, normality. When she pulled away, Clio was biting her lip the same way she always had, nibbling voraciously, a squirrel with a fresh nut. Jeanie knew all her mannerisms. The three of them, Clio, Amber and Jeanie, had been friends since spending hours together at school not being picked in PE. 5 years of standing in the freezing cold feeling invisible. 5 years of pretending that they didn't care what the world thought of them, and of only seeing the best in each other. The kind of trio that nothing could ever break. After school finished, they had somehow all returned to Sunshine Sands, which had the depressing distinction of having the highest rainfall of any small seaside town in the UK. After loud teenage proclamations that they would move to America and lead the glossy lives depicted in the TV shows they devoured on E4, somehow they had never quite managed it. They had not moved to LA, bumped into Leonardo DiCaprio and married him as they had intended. His loss. They would giggle over chips and tea from the beach cafe, and their 30s became decades they would rather not name. He could have had us, and all he got was a string of supermodels and an Oscar. Poor Leo. Jeanie, I'm serious, I could have done it. Jeanie looked down at the mess of bone and blood. She didn't know much, but she knew that Clio wasn't capable of murder.
No, I know you, Clio. There is no way you did this.
Clio leant into her. Are you sure?
Yes.
Jeanie thought for a second.
I mean, you were so hammered you could barely sing, let alone manage to do that.
Jeanie gestured towards the body at their feet.
And then there's who you are. You pick up spiders and put them outside. You recycle. You run a free Zumba class at the community centre. You're no killer.
But I was outside when it happened. I must have passed out so it'll look like I did it. Clio was pacing now.
No, we'll call 999. The police will come and they'll figure out what happened.
Jeanie reached for her phone, only to discover it wasn't there. No, Clio shook her head, the rain running in rivulets down her cheeks. Don't call yet.
Why not?
Because... Clio's face was alight with desperation. It reminded Jeanie of the time Clio had got all dolled up for the lower sixth disco, only to see the boy she fancied sticking his hand up a supply teacher's dress during the first song. Because I need to hide the body. What? Jeanie cupped a hand around her ear. She must have misheard. Clio yelled, I need to hide the body! So she had heard correctly the first time.
Why?
Because they'll lock me up, Jeanie. I need time to prove it wasn't me, and yesterday
No.
Jeanie had to stop this.
We can't hide him, Clio. We'd be breaking the law.
Jeanie had to convince her.
Look, I get that this is a shock, but hiding the body would be madness.
Clio was taut, breathing fast. Jeanie tried again.
Let's call it in, Clio. Now.
Clio shook her head. I can't. I need more time.
No.
Jeanie hated refusing her friends. She was always the one who stayed for one more drink she didn't want or who drove miles to see a movie she knew she wouldn't enjoy. But this was too much.
Clio, we can't. We'd be in all kinds of trouble, and I have the twins, so...
And I have Nina! Clio threw back her head, as theatrical as the time she played Eponine in a college production of Les Miserables, still singing as the flimsy barricades literally collapsed beneath her. That's why, Jeanie. I mean, Nina needs me. I can't leave her, not after what Gary's done to her. Jeanie's brain struggled to keep up. As far as she was aware, Clio's daughter, Nina, had no contact with her stepfather, Gary, anymore.
What has he done?
Yesterday I found out that he'd... Clio shook her head. She started pulling up her soggy pyjama sleeves, readying herself for action. Are you going to help me or not? Jeanie looked at her friend and felt a fierce pang of love shoot through her. Clio was a one-woman miniseries, but she was also fearless, loyal, and absolutely always there when Jeanie needed her. It was Clio who had driven Jeanie to that last IVF appointment, the only person to believe that it would finally work this time. And it was Clio who had lost her savings, house, and livelihood thanks to... Jeanie mentally apologised for thinking ill of the dead. That git Gary. Now Clio might lose her freedom as well. I'm moving him now. Clio stood over the body. Are you in? Jeanie stalled.
What do we need to do?
I don't know. I've never done this before. My car? Let's get him in there. Jeanie frowned.
Is he going to fit, though? He's a bit big for a Fiat 500.
Her stomach spiked with an adrenaline she normally reserved for her twins' unintentional flights down the stairs. She couldn't do this. We'll have to make him fit. Please, Jeanie. Clio's voice shook. The fear in her eyes. That was what swung it. Jeanie had never seen Clio scared before. She held up her hands.
Okay.
She had to help. Clio and Amber were her people. They had shared hangovers, birthdays, teenage escapades, hot flushes and tears over boyfriends, parents, arrogant bosses, boobs drooping and bums spreading. They had eaten together, puked together, interrailed together, shared changing rooms, screw-ups, painkillers and hangover cures. The three of them were a team. A family. And Gary Good wasn't going to ruin Cleo's life again. Not on Jeanie's watch.
Right then, I'll take the...
She looked at the head and balked.
I'll take the legs.
She tottered to the south end of Gary, wondering if she might faint. The rain plastered her hair over her eyes, which was probably for the best. Okay. Clio positioned herself above his shattered head. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jeanie lowered her hands towards his ankles, suddenly wishing she had drunk more. She was trembling, and her mind was swirling with horror. But she had given birth, for God's sake. Twice, in a lay-by. She could do anything. Thunder rumbled in the distance. How appropriate. Clio bent down. On my count. 1, 2... Stop! They both froze. They knew that voice. They waited, heads hanging, as Amber came outside to join them.
Chapter 4. Gary. 9:30 a.m. Death minus 18 hours. Blissfully unaware of the picture that had just been taken of his backside in full flagrante, Gary, showered, dressed and doused in Boss, was right on time for his appointment with Johnny Fernandez. As he passed through the wrought iron gates, he stopped his car, tapping a message into the small grey phone in his hand before turning it off and putting it back in its hiding place. He smiled, satisfied. The money should land today. It wasn't even 10 a.m, and already he was well on his way to being a winner. The wheels of his red MG crunched on the white gravel of the winding drive as he passed a life-size topiary elephant and swept up to the magisterium, a vast 17th century vicarage just begging for Gary to bring it up to date. It was a crumbling canvas, ivy spread across the eastern corner, green leaves against honey-coloured walls, and trails of winter roses climbed the tapering pillars that stood on either side of the imposing front steps. Gary's first move would be to rip the plants out to create the clear lines he preferred. Maybe he would go glass-fronted too, just to maximise impact. He could explore that further when the owner Johnny signed on the dotted line today. Gary checked his reflection in the rearview mirror before getting out of his car, proud of what he saw. Since entering his 40s, longer ago than he would choose to admit, he had been careful to preserve his good looks. They were even more important now that he was sole CEO of Looking Good, without Clio to drag him down with her embarrassing small talk, wild hair and dramatic taste in scarves. Gary straightened his collar. His image helped him to make his mark, like the fleet of company vans he had yet to pay for and the staff he had hired to design virtual tours like the one he was about to deliver. Only the best for the firm now Clio was out of the way. It would all pay off in the end. He strode up the wide stone steps, feeling powerful in his favourite navy suit, until he was standing in front of the heavy black front door. As he lifted the brass knocker, he had a feeling he was being watched and turned, hoping to catch his observer by surprise. A tabby cat was walking across his bonnet, claws skittering across the paintwork that Gary waxed himself every Sunday afternoon, his own form of religion. Gary swore under his breath. No one, it was hallowed territory, like Wembley Stadium or Wimbledon Centre Court. Get away! He hissed at the cat, which steadfastly refused to move. Gary strode down the steps and had just grabbed the bloody animal by the scruff of its neck when he heard a voice. Gary, hi! The last word was at least 10 syllables long. Public school twat, check. Gary turned, switching on his biggest smile. "Hi, Johnny." "What are you doing to my cat?" Johnny folded his arms, his eyes hidden behind aviator shades. He was so different to his brother Marshall. Johnny was wiry, where Marshall was bodybuilder broad. Johnny wore a tight white t-shirt, while Marshall was always dressed in extravagantly patterned shirts. But there were similarities. The cheekbones, the Fernandez signet ring on his little finger, the way he oozed money, right down to his expensive brogues and ostentatious Carrera watch. It must be nice having an inheritance. All Gary's dad had left him were freckles and an allergy to freshly cut grass. To be fair, Johnny had experienced downs as well as ups. He had run his father's shipping business into the ground, only to rise again as the inventor of the Fernandez chip, now used in smartphones across the globe. His company, Fernandez Tech, was about to float on the stock exchange, and the shares were priced high. Johnny was the kind of client Gary needed, the kind of client looking good deserved. Gary became aware that Johnny was waiting for an answer, his eyebrow arched. "I was just saying hello to him." Gary tried to stroke Jerry, but the animal yowled so loudly that Gary jumped despite himself. He tripped, falling to his knees behind his car, out of sight of Johnny. He was about to give the animal a good clout when he heard a voice. "Dad, Johnny cut in. "Not now, Christian." Gary froze, his knees pressing into the gravel, listening. You never knew what might come in useful. Christian spoke again. "I took later, okay? But I just want to tell you..." Christian's voice rose to a whine. "Christian!" Johnny's voice was as final as a descending guillotine. "Later? Haven't you got a job to go to? Or have you been fired already?" "No. I mean, yes, I do have a job, but... So go. Whatever it is, it can wait. I'll see you later." Gary stood up to see Christian's slicked back brown hair and sloping shoulders disappearing reluctantly towards the row of cars that were parked around. He knew all about Johnny's 18-year-old son, despite his absence from Johnny's carefully curated Instagram grid, which was full of #blessed pictures of Johnny, his second wife, and their 1-year-old girl. But Gary had done his research. He knew that Christian had just been expelled from one of England's most prestigious schools, and he knew that it wasn't the first time. "Gary," Johnny beckoned, "are you coming in then?" He picked up the cat, now angelic and purring, and stepped back to let Gary come inside. The hallway was cavernous, with a dark mahogany floor and green floral wallpaper that belonged in a Jane Austen remake. Wide stairs spiralled upwards on both sides, and Gary knew from the plans that they led to a floor featuring 5 bedrooms with 5 more in the south wing. Gary's plans for the Fernandez home were ambitious. He would knock down all the walls downstairs, creating a huge living space the likes of which would get his firm featured in Ideal Home. It was solely Gary's design, after their architect Angus had walked out in misguided loyalty to Clio. Not that Gary missed him. He had found his calling. He had always been more than a brickie, and without Clio there was no one to hold him back. Soon, the whole country would be looking good. "This way." Gary followed Johnny past imposing mirrors and doors leading into rooms with cream sofas, dark tables, and huge floral displays. Finally, they arrived at the kitchen, where Gary saw Johnny's wife Vivian standing in the corner staring at her phone, one hand playing with her hair. She spoke without turning round, her words rushed and impatient. "Darling, he's just called again. It's the 3rd time this week. It's like..." She shook her head, eyes still trained on her phone. "We have to do something about him." Johnny coughed. walking across and kissing her as if to quieten her. "Baby, Gary's here." "Oh." She turned. Was that a flicker of dislike on her face? Gary shook the thought away. She and Johnny couldn't know what he had been up to. He had covered his tracks too well. A moment later, she was smiling. "Sorry about that. I was just talking about our gardener. You know how they can be." Of course. Gary didn't. Waste of money, gardeners. Just lay concrete and be done with it. "I'm Vivian." She wafted towards him, all fragrance and legs in tight black jeans. A necklace sparkled at her throat, and Gary knew that he was looking at genuine diamonds. Her long hair tumbled down her back, just the way Gary liked it. He gave her one of his humblest smiles, running a hand over his salt and pepper crew cut. "Nice to meet you, Vivian." "Thank you for inviting me here." "Of course." Her red lips curved upwards. "We can't wait to hear the final plans." Her dark eyes glittered, and he suddenly had the sense that he was trapped, that if he turned towards the kitchen door, it would slam shut, leaving him alone with vipers or spiders or, God forbid, his soon-to-be ex-wife. He must be more nervous than he had realised. A lot rode on today, after all. If Johnny didn't transfer the deposit, then, well, Gary stopped himself. He had this in the bag. "Come and sit down, and I'll get you a coffee." Vivian's husky voice made it sound like she was inviting him into a private booth for show and tell. Gary pulled a chair up to the long oak table, complete with orange Fernandez Tech mugs and the kind of biscuits that were so pricey you couldn't even get them in Waitrose. He looked at the curve of Vivian's hips as she flicked the Quooker tap on to fill up the cafetiere and wondered if someday he might end up in her bed too. He would certainly enjoy that. He would enjoy that very much indeed. He got out his iPad, ready to sell the bold, innovative design that would rewrite their lives. His pitch was pure gold if he did say so himself, demonstrating how, if they chose him, their parties would be the stuff of Hello Magazine double spreads. How every single day would be golden because of his vision. "Okay, we're listening." Johnny and Vivian sat opposite him, a baby monitor on the table beside them, the screen showing a small figure spread-eagled in a cot. "Bear." Vivian followed Gary's eyes. "Our little one." "Cute." Gary couldn't stand toddlers, loud, dumb and demanding. His limited experience of step-parenting Clio's daughter Nina had shown him that he didn't like teenagers much either. The two of them gazed soppily at the monitor for so long that Gary began to wonder if they were going to give it a cuddle. He forced a smile. "So, shall I start now?" "Okay." Johnny's eyes met his. Gary took a breath. "I bet she's going to want to live in a house that reflects your ambitions for her." A seamless link. God, he was good. "Let me show you what I've got in mind." He started talking fast and loud, and they watched him, their faces blank. Too blank. As Gary shared his vision of skylights and snugs, of underfloor heating and cornices, he knew something was wrong. They were giving him nothing. He tried harder, raising his voice as he reached the end. "So there you have it. Modern yet classic, luxurious yet in keeping with history. The new magisterium just for you." "I'm not sure." Johnny leant back in his chair, yawning. "It's a bit basic, isn't it?" Gary clenched his fists. "No, it isn't." His design was brilliant. His girlfriend Denise had told him so. "No, these plans are ambitious, in keeping with the way you live. You'll have an infinity pool overlooking the downs, a solarium, 2 towers and a 360-degree deck. He leant forwards, still smiling, while inside panic was starting to pulse. He needed the deposit today. He had wages to pay, and more. Johnny shrugged. I don't know. It all seems a bit IKEA. Gary nearly spilt his coffee. You what? Johnny sighed. We just expected a bit more from you. Gary fought to keep his voice even. But you approved the initial designs I sent through. I thought you were going to pay the deposit today so we can get things moving. I've got the builders on standby. We can't decide now. Vivian had picked up her phone, already scrolling. Maybe when we're back. Back from London. We have a black tie event tonight. But Gary had to salvage this. He stopped himself. For a moment, he wished Clio was with him. She could always get anyone on side. No, the last thing he needed was that bloody woman. He licked his dry lips. How about I come back at the end of the day, once you've thought about it? We told you we're going away. Johnny stood up. We'll be in touch. When? Gary sounded like a needy teenager asking for a date. When we're ready. Johnny finished his coffee and walked to the door. Gary swallowed, reminding himself that Gary knew Johnny's secret. He could bring him down with one phone call. But that was the nuclear option. He wasn't there yet. Instead, he needed a plan B. Without the deposit, he was under pressure. The company accounts were empty. He had no money to pay the staff today, and he was being pursued by various contractors whose invoices were long overdue. The gap was about 100 grand in total. Peanuts to a man like Johnny, and this deposit would have kept things going until Gary could get some other clients on board. But now he had a hole. Now he had a problem. Well, thank you for your time. He tucked his iPad under his arm. And do let me know. He had a sudden image of Marsh, whose grey hair and cashmere cardigans belied her reputation for relentlessly punishing anyone foolish enough not to pay her back on time. Last week, she had granted Gary a loan at an eye-watering interest rate of 50%. The first repayment was due at 6 p.m. tonight. £10,000 he absolutely didn't have. Yet. He had work to do. I'll see myself out. Goodbye, Gary. Vivian had picked up a magazine and was flicking through the pages. Clearly, it was another tough day at the coalface for her. Oh, look! It's Boo-Boo! She squealed at Johnny. I did Vogue with her once. Gary strode down the hall, his heart beating fast. This was a setback, but he held his head high. He was Gary Good. He could figure this out if he moved fast. He got into his car and drove out of the gates, stopping for an obligatory Instagram snap for his feed, tapping out some text about new opportunities before posting it to his 350 followers. Soon he would have more, thousands more. It was only a matter of time. Then he revved the accelerator and rounded the corner in a flurry of dust. So lost in thought, he didn't even see the battered red Mini approaching, nor the dark-haired driver hunched over the wheel. The car swerved to avoid him, but Gary didn't care that he was on the wrong side of the road. He didn't care about anything but how he was going to get the money he needed. Without even braking, he flicked the other driver a V sign and sped on. He was Gary Good, and it was time that the whole world got out of his way.
Chapter 5. Amber. Amber frequently felt as if the world fell apart if she dared to switch off for more than a nanosecond. This morning was proving to be no exception. Having just spent several hours locked in the loo in Clio's caravan, she was not in the best of moods. That her two friends had failed to hear her was nearly as incredible as the fact that Jeanie's pelvic floor hadn't propelled her into the bathroom for all that time. Eventually, Amber had fallen asleep. But now, after finally managing to break the lock and escape, she found herself wiping the rain from her eyes, checking that she wasn't still drunk, or rather, checking that she wasn't so drunk that she was seeing things. No, they really were about to be that stupid. Stop! Jeanie and Clio froze, hands perilously close to what looked like a dead body. Amber curled her hands into fists and made a silent vow never to drink again. She couldn't leave these two on their own, not for a second. Step away, people! They both shuffled backwards, heads hanging, shoulders slumped. Amber leant down to see who the corpse had been. Shit! Her hand flew to her mouth. Gary? Oh my God, what the hell happened? She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a pair of latex gloves. Jeanie gasped.
Why do you have those? You left the police weeks ago.
Just in case I fancy a one-night stand. For a second, Amber allowed herself a smile.
Really?
Jeanie's blue eyes widened. No! Amber snapped them on, bending down to examine the body, though the rain was doing its best to stop her. I'm still a detective, whatever they say. Now tell me what happened. That set them off, both together, same as ever.
Clio wanted to move the body, and I couldn't say no, but I knew it was wrong. I knew.
And I think it might have been me, and I just wanted some time to prove it wasn't, and I can't die in prison, Amber. There's Nina and... Wait. Amber took in the blood, the fractured bone.